What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Pub Sports Radio Baseball Show. My name is Jose Bouquet, and alongside me today is another special guest, author of 42 Today, Jackie Robinson and His Legacy. Or it's not author, I guess. You're an editor nowadays, Michael. But it's Michael G. Long. Michael, how are you doing?
Doing fine. Thanks, Jose, for having me on the program. I'm grateful.
No problem at all. You know, we were talking pre-show. You're in snowy Pennsylvania. There's rain coming down here. You know, I think it's a perfect day to sit inside and talk about baseball, talk about Jackie Robinson, you know?
There's never a bad time to talk about Jackie Robinson, but especially today. You're right about that.
Yes, that is true. You've devoted a good chunk of your life to Jackie Robinson. I've in my research, you know, you've done. Let me just say this: you know a thing or two about Jackie. I can say that.
Yeah, I think so. You know, I sort of stumbled upon Robinson about a decade ago in the sense that I was studying Richard Nixon. I was at the Presidential Archives out in California, and an archivist came up to my desk and said, "Hey, Mike, have you seen the Jackie Robinson file?" And I said, "No." And he brought out this thick file of correspondence between Robinson and Richard Nixon. And it was absolutely fascinating. The letters ran from about 1956 maybe to 1972, and they dealt mostly with politics and economics. I was captivated at that point, and so I contacted Rachel Robinson and asked her for permission to do a book about Jackie, and she was so kind and so gracious and gave me permission. But yeah, that was the initial hook. I got into Robinson not so much through his sports, but through his politics.
Yeah, I find that so interesting that you didn't even come from a sports like background, I guess, and you just jump right into Jackie, and his story and everything that comes with it is really daunting. You know, there's a lot of pressure that comes with it because he's, I mean, an American icon, Mount Rushmore baseball player, if not American. So, I mean, what is that pressure like for you? I mean, you've done this, well, I guess, a couple times now writing about Jackie, but I mean, is there still that pressure that comes along with the name?
Not for me, but I can tell you that when I look at the pressure that I encounter every now and then in my life, it no way compares to what Robinson felt in 1957, you know, when he walked on the diamond on April 15th, 1947. That must have been incredible pressure. And, you know, he was lonely early on. He was a lone figure. There are these myths that white players helped him along the way early in 1947, and Rachel Robinson says that's simply not the case. And the story of Pee Wee Reese putting his arm around him simply didn't happen, Rachel says, especially early in 1947. Robinson, he was a lone figure. He would go home late at night after the game, and he would kneel by the bedside and pray to God for strength and courage all by himself. And I like that image because it gives us some indication of what Robinson was up against and the loneliness that he felt in 1947.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating to think about. And Michael, what I took out of that is what you're telling me, Michael, is that the movie 42 is not a historical representation exactly of what happened. I am now dumbfounded to hear that. That is, you know, I thought Pee Wee Reese, good guy Pee Wee Reese, just threw his arm around him, and then boom, everything was cut and dry after that.
Yeah, racism disappeared. Yeah, racism disappeared when Pee Wee Reese did that.
Exactly. That's what I thought.
Well, I will say that 42 is an inspiring movie. And yeah, you know, I have friends who are historians who nitpicked it, and the Pee Wee Reese story is mythical, but I really enjoyed the movie. I found it inspiring. One of the things I really liked about 42, the movie, is that Bozeman did a great job of displaying Robinson's fiery temper, but keeping it in check. And, you know, this is what Branch Rickey was after. He wanted somebody who would be explosive on the diamond, but also somebody who could keep that in check. You know, Robinson wasn't the best player from the Negro Legs at the time, and he certainly didn't have a mild disposition like Campanella. You know, Rickey could have turned Campanella and brought him up, but he wanted somebody like Robinson who was fiery. You know, one of his teammates said he had a temper like a rattlesnake, a teammate from Negro Legs, and he did. but he also sacrificed for the greater cause, and he knew what that greater cause was. He knew that he was making history, and so he decided just to swallow all those racist taunts that came his way. One of my contributors says, Jonathan I, says that Robinson swallowed all those taunts and turned them into muscle. He did it. That's exactly what he did. So the pressure that guy felt was incredible in 47.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine. Like he died at a relatively young age, but I mean, at his age, he's lived so many lifetimes. I mean, he lived some hard years, so I can't even imagine. I wanted to ask you about how this book came together. You know, like I said, you've written about Jackie before, but what brought this book together, and you know, how did it come out so nicely? You know, I love the title, or the title and the cover. The cover looks great.
You know, lots of people claim Jackie Robinson as their own, and sometimes he appears as a one-dimensional figure from 1947. I think in some ways we've frozen him there in 1947. Major League Baseball definitely has. So the Jackie Robinson they celebrate every year, I think, is sort of like this Jackie Robinson I grew up with, and that is the smiling baseball player who soldiers on non-violently, who is non-threatening, who turns his other cheek and shatters the color barrier. I wanted the contributors to go beyond that and to present Robinson in some real depth and to break some myths along the way. And so, you know, I put out some bait, and a lot of people bit, because Robinson has that magnetic pull. He really does. He's still a national icon in U.S. history. He's got a magnetic personality. And so, you know, when I asked the contributors to write, they really signed on without hesitation. I don't think there's anybody who said no along the way.
And that's pretty crazy to hear about. I mean, you've written books before, and I know it's probably kind of difficult to try to get people to all help in on a book, you know.
It's sort of like herding cats for some of the subjects that are out there. I'm working on a book on religion and nonviolence right now, and that's like herding cats. Yeah. But this one was really delightfully easy in terms of dealing with the contributors. You know, I got some, and we have some great people in this book. We have George Vesey, who for many years wrote for the New York Times. We have Jonathan Ige, did a great book on Muhammad Ali. We have ESPN's Howard Bryant and Kevin Merida, Kevin Burns and Sarah Burns and David McMahon, who did the great documentary on Jackie Robinson, wrote the foreword, and the list goes on. I mean, it's really an all-star team.
Yeah. Let's keep. I love this. Let's keep pumping up your own book. There's not many people. I love when people are finally like, you know what? Yeah, I wrote this. This is awesome. I've got all these good people coming on. Like, you should go. Yes, let's keep doing it, Michael. I love it. You know, I was doing research on Jackie Robinson. You know, I'm relatively young. I'm 23. You get told all these things about Jackie Robinson. Like, for example, when I'm doing my research, like, you would never know, like you said, you would never know Jackie Robinson had like a kind of a temper, and eventually he got to express all of his, you know, like inner feelings and all this stuff. But the craziest thing that I saw when I was doing my research was that Jackie Robinson got inducted into the Hall of Fame with 77% of the vote. I need an explanation. I just need an explanation of why it was not higher. And I mean, I guess the explanation would probably be racism, but I'm shocked by that.
Yeah, you know, 77% is probably a pretty high figure given the racism that was among the sports writers and others at this point. But I will say that Robinson, when he was thinking about the Hall of Fame, this is before he entered the Hall of Fame, he had some concerns, and people told him that he might not get in because he had alienated writers and reporters along the way. And that was true. You know, he spoke his mind. By the time that he finished in 1956, he had really straightened that backbone of his and didn't turn the cheek anymore after 2 seasons with the Dodgers, and really fought quite a bit, almost incessantly. I mean, the guy was a fighter to the core. And when he spoke his mind, you know, he alienated quite a few writers. And so there was some concern that he wouldn't get in at all. So I think Robinson was delighted that he got in with 77%. But yeah, you're right about that. I mean, the guy's career, he batted .311 or .313, I forget which. He stole home plate 19 times, great fielder, Hall of Fame stats, and he did it under enormous pressure. This was a guy who went out to the diamond and knew that there were people in the stands who had sent him hate mail. And some of the hate mail said, "We're going to shoot you today." And can you imagine performing under that type of pressure? But there he was. Yeah.
Yeah, we recently did an episode of the Pub Sports Radio baseball show where we talked about the greatest second baseman of all time, and I lumped Jackie into second base, and I said he was the greatest because all that pressure is just like you can't even imagine recreating it right now. There you have you're the whole pressure of one race hating you and wanting you to fail, and the other your race wanting you to succeed and all this stuff, and it's insane to think about. It's completely insane. We've talked
it's one thing.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's one thing to put up Baseball Hall of Fame stats, right?
Yes.
And it's another thing to put up those stats with that type of pressure. And you're right. That pressure came not only from white racists, but it came from everyday Black Americans who would write him these beautiful letters about how they admired him so much, how they looked up to him, how he inspired them. And there's this one beautiful letter I read from a woman who said that they all gathered around the local store in their farm community to listen to Dodgers games, and just to catch a or just to hear Jackie Robinson playing for the Dodgers was so inspiring to these young Black farmers. I think it was Virginia. This is just a great letter. But you're right; he had pressure from every corner.
Yeah, it's insane. And shout out to Rachel Robinson too, who equally had to deal with this stuff and was the one outlet that Jackie could go to. So. Can't forget that. Everyone knows the saying, behind a great man and the woman, we all know the whole thing. Michael, I wanted to play a little mini game with you here. Everyone knows TNT on NBA does who he played for to figure out, who the person plays for, blah, blah, blah. I want to play a game of how he get there. I want to know I want to dispel the rumors. How did the Monarchs first find Jackie Robinson? We'll start there. How do we get there? Because he just came out of the war. He came out of, I believe it was World War II. I'm not sure. My years, are all messed up now. But he just comes out of the war. He played football, did all these things at UCLA, and then the Monarchs were like, "Hey, why don't you come play this baseball?"
Yeah, you're throwing me a curveball. I hope you have the answer, Jose. Do you have the answer?
No, I don't. I just wanted to know. I'm trying to figure this stuff out because, like I said, he just I read a little bit about him. He comes out of the war, he plays a little football, and then just randomly just shows up on the Monarchs one day. And it's like, all right, and then another year later we go, all right, now he's on the Dodgers, and it's crazy. You would think that he would play more baseball on the Monarchs. He'd play just 1 year, basically. It's just crazy to me.
Yeah, for that particular fact that you're asking about, I'm going to have to point your listeners to Arnold Rampersad's excellent biography called Jackie Robinson, and he deals a lot more with the baseball years than I can ever even imagine too. But he only played 1 year for the Kansas City Monarchs. You're right. He didn't like the Negro Legs. He detested the Negro Legs, actually. He thought the accommodations were horrible. He thought the conditions were inferior. He thought the play was inferior in some ways. He just wasn't happy with the Monarchs. He wasn't happy with the Negro Legs. I don't think he was sad to see the Negro Legs disappear, and they started to collapse when he jumped to the Dodgers. But yeah, he was not a fan of the Negro Legs. It's interesting you know about his football career. He did play with the Honolulu Bears.
Yeah.
Let
me tell you, Michael, the Wikipedia machine, it helps, and it teaches you. I was in my head, I was like, I need to do some research on the Honolulu Bears because I feel like you could do great things with that mascot and logo. A Robinson 42 Honolulu Bears jersey, Michael. I don't know, man. I don't know. That's selling like hotcakes. That is selling. Like
this was after he lettered in 4 sports at UCLA and then in high school.
Yeah,
he also was a state champion in tennis.
Not a big deal. Okay, sure.
And his favorite sport was golf. Later on,
it's crazy.
Oh my gosh! Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon thought he was one of the greatest athletes in U.S. history. And I think he's right about that. In fact, when these two guys met, Nixon and Robinson, was at the 1952 Republican National Convention. And they bonded because Nixon had recalled a 1939 football play that Robinson was involved in. He ran the play for the UCLA Bruins against the Ducks of the University of Oregon. And Nixon recounted the play in detail, and Robinson was smitten at that point. And so they formed this lifelong friendship over Nixon's love of sports and appreciation for Jackie Robinson's athletic abilities.
What an interesting relationship I bet that was, too. Like, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, you know, I'm sorry, Jose.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Robinson left his job at Chock full of nuts. He was the vice president of personnel there. He left that job, took a sabbatical in 1960 to campaign full time for Richard Nixon, believe it or not. Nixon at the time was running, of course, against John F. Kennedy. Rachel Robinson loved Kennedy. And Robinson backed Nixon. He backed him because Nixon helped steer passage of the 1957 Civil Rights Act legislation, because Nixon had traveled to Africa, because Nixon had promised him to move faster on civil rights. And Robinson had met Kennedy in Georgetown and said, he told Rachel later that Kennedy never looked him in the eye once during the meeting. And not only that, he said that he didn't know much about Black interests. And so that really steered Robinson to Nixon, although they soured later on. But Nixon got the early support from Jackie Robinson.
That was interesting. I was going to comment. I would think that it would go the opposite way, if just by, your outsider's perspective. I know with barely anything about politics, but, like I said, that from that outsider's point of view, you would think that it would go the opposite way.
Yeah, Robinson, well, Rachel did go with John F. Kennedy, but Robinson had this sense. He came out of the GOP, he came out of appreciating the Lincoln dimension of the Republican Party. And I won't bore you too much with politics here, but I do want to say that he believed that Black voters should suspend their votes and not put themselves in the back pocket of any particular party, Democrats or Republicans, but go for whichever candidate and whichever party would best advance their interests. For Robinson, sometimes that meant Nixon, and sometimes it meant the liberal Democrat Hubert Humphrey.
Yeah, I find that's so fascinating. Just if people think that Robinson's just a baseball player, guess what? He had his whole, he wasn't just that one rookie year. There was so much more to him, especially his post-playing career, too.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned the Negro Legs early on. I want to go back to that if I can. George Vesey, who wrote for many years with the New York Times, has an essay in the book, and he makes the case that Robinson really transformed Major League Baseball. And again, you're the bigger baseball fan here today than I am, so correct me on if I'm wrong about this, but Vesey makes the point that when runners did that long curve of a turn at first base after getting a hit, and then when they danced between the bases, and when they stole home plate, and when they did the hard slide, Vesey says that's Jackie Robinson baseball. He injected Black baseball into white Major League Baseball. And not only did that happen, but Vesey makes the interesting point that recent analytics have tamped all that down, and the game has ended up more boring.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Jose?
No, I completely agree with you there. I think that's 100% right. We don't see steals anymore. Everyone loves Rickey Henderson. There is not one person on this earth that has a bad word to say about Rickey Henderson and what he did. And his electric stealing of the bases, the first scene in like 42, the historical document that is all accurate is his whole Jackie Robinson trying to mess up the pitcher. That's the famous scene. And I think you're right about that. And it's just a shame to see that we don't get steals anymore. But math, Michael, math. That's all that matters nowadays. Math. It all makes sense.
Oh, man.
So
for me, my favorite scene in 42 is when Robinson played brilliantly, right, by Chad Boseman, goes into the what's Chad's last name? Chadwick Boseman, right?
Yeah, Chadwick Boseman. You're right.
Yeah. My favorite scene is when he goes into the tunnel between the dugout and the locker room. Do you remember this? And he has that bat and he smashes it.
Yes.
I love that scene because it gives us a sense of that fiery personality that Robinson had that we sort of boxed away through the years. That's my favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah, that's a really good scene as well. I mean, I think that was the trailer scene that everyone like bought in on, and and the whole thing. I think also I watch a little bit of Ken Burns baseball. You helped make that, not a big deal. That's a big thing to say nowadays. You just made the one like historical like baseball to help make it. But Branch Rickey was big on Jackie, like turning the other cheek. That was his phrase for 3 years. And we've talked about Jackie's rage. How exactly did, when Jackie got like let off the leash and he could finally express himself, besides arguing with umpires and such, how did he change as a baseball player or as a person, even if you know more about that? Because like we said, I'm the bigger baseball guy here, I guess. But I mean, Michael, Jackie Robinson like the back of your hand. So,
I don't think that he changed as a person after he stopped turning the other cheek. I think that turning the other cheek was a real struggle for him and started to change him in some ways. But I'm not so sure that he changed throughout that period. But I will say that other than fighting with umpires and other players and so forth, Robinson began to speak his mind a lot more to the press. And again, this goes back to the alienation thing. He really mouthed off, and rightly so sometimes, at the white sports writers. The black sports writers are really the ones who helped Robinson get into the Major League of Baseball. In fact, that's the untold story in some ways. Wendell Smith and black newspapers across the country had been clamoring for somebody like Robinson to be in Major League Baseball. And believe it or not, so had the communist newspapers, especially the Daily Worker. So there's this really strange alliance between communists and black newspaper men at the time who really pushed the door down Major League Baseball and got Robinson this early, and you know this, Jose, they got Robinson this early tryout with Boston Red Sox in 1945.
Yep.
Which becomes a sham tryout, right? And then Robinson, for the rest of his life, despises the Red Sox. He calls Tom Yawkey the most bigoted guy in baseball. In fact, the Red Sox don't integrate until 1959 when they bring Pupsy Green onto the team. So Robinson hated the Red Sox.
Yeah, hey, and guess what? He turned out to be right about Tom Yawkey. It turns out, who would have thought? There's a
I should add that the Yawkey Foundation really supports the Jackie Robinson Foundation today, which is really lovely to me.
Yeah,
Jackie Robinson Foundation raises a lot of money for students of color and gives them a lot of scholarships. And the Yawkey Foundation works closely with the Jackie Robinson Foundation.
Yeah,
the irony.
Yeah, 10s and 20s and 30s of years later, at least we've come full circle on that. There's two questions that your book tackles that I wanted to ask you about, and you don't have to give up the whole book here, but I just wanted to ask you. You mentioned, or you posed a question like, what would happen if Jackie wasn't as successful as he was? Would there would have been someone else? You mentioned Lou Campanella earlier, and you mentioned another name who I just completely botched over my head just now. But what do you think would have happened? If Jackie was not as successful? He won Rookie of the Year, all that good stuff. But would it have been a slower integration process? Would we remember Jackie, but would we laud someone else as that guy?
Yeah, what would have happened? That is the question of questions, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I can't even begin to imagine. I mean, let's just think, had Branch Rickey brought up Campanella, it would have been an entirely different year. Campanella had a really mild disposition, right?
Yeah.
In fact, Robinson found him too conservative and not outspoken enough. And I think that would that have made it easier? I don't know. I don't think so, because Campanella didn't have that explosive fury that Robinson had. What about Larry Doby? I don't know. He didn't have the same type of excellence on the field that Robinson had, right? For whatever reason, boy, it all came together in Jackie Robinson. Rickey was looking for that guy who brought excellence. As we know, Robinson, again, wasn't the best player from the Negro Legs, but he brought excellence and he brought a solid moral character. And I think Rickey got really lucky with Robinson. And Rickey was a shrewd businessman. Yeah, he was a pious Methodist. He was interested in racial integration. He was interested in integrating Major League Baseball after a lot of people encouraged and urged and lobbied him to do so. But he was also a shrewd businessman, and he knew that when he brought Robinson onto the field, those turnstiles would click, and boy, did they ever. He made a lot of money off of Jackie
Oh
Robinson.
yeah.
And Jack and Rachel, they had to go into Branch Rickey's office and ask for more money. That couldn't have been easy. And why they had to do that, I don't know. But no, that's a great question, Jose. I'm just so grateful that Robinson was there in 47.
Yeah, my second, I guess, hypothetical question that you posed in the book that I wanted to pick your brain about is, what if we wore 42 still? You know, we still have that Jackie Robinson Day, which is great to see. Everyone wears 42 in his honor, all that good stuff. And I just wanted to ask you, what do you think, you know, is that message, or what would happen if we wore 42 again? Would it just bring back those vibes like, oh wow, how special it is to wear 42, blah blah blah? And I guess I want to ask you, how did 42 end up getting retired league wide? How did that process come about?
Yeah, hey, let's go back to the locker room when Jackie Robinson walked in and didn't have a locker. He walked back and he saw that his jersey was on a peg. And he didn't have a low number. Low numbers were treasured at that time, right? Number 4 and number 2 were available that year. He didn't get either of those numbers. Duke Snyder got one of them. He got the number 42, which was not a treasured number by any stretch of the imagination. But he made a number out of that number. He made a number out of 42. We didn't know it before Robinson, but we sure as heck know what 42 stands for today. And that's because Robinson took that number as a challenge and gave it substance. So what do we do about it? I don't know. Bud Selig, I truly believe that Bud Selig is a big fan of Jackie Robinson. I do. I think Selig freezes him in 1947 in many ways and hasn't presented or did the real Jackie Robinson in all of his dimensions. But I do believe that Selig had a big heart when he decided that Major League Baseball would retire 42. So I love Jackie Robinson Day. I do. I love to see all the players wearing number 42. I love to see the celebrations and the honorific things that occur that day. One of the contributors to the book makes the case that the problem with that is that we sort of put the jersey in their rafters and dust it off just once a year, and that's not enough. What we should really do is allow players to wear it throughout the MLB season, and that would encourage us to talk more about Jackie Robinson. Somebody else just suggested to me that what we should do is keep Jackie Robinson Day, have 42, have players wear 42 all the time, but let the MVPs wear 42 throughout the season as well, so that we constantly see it. You know, I don't have a horse in this race, Jose, but I do know that the more we talk about Robinson, the better. And anything that can make that happen, I'll support.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think Jackie Robinson Day is one of my favorite days of the year. I think 42 is one of those numbers, you know. I think, you know, the moment, or like, I guess the time when you have a number and you make a number synonymous, wow, that takes you to like a whole nother like atmosphere. Like 42, Jackie Robinson, Gretzky did it, and it's, I think all those guys that you just like have a jersey number and you just know like that's their number. That's just a different plane of like legendhood, I guess.
Yeah, and what I love about 42 is that it's not only about his stellar baseball career, it's also about the way that he just transformed the United States as well. So that number has society and culture and sports all wrapped into it.
Yeah. I have 2 more questions for you, Michael. Thank you for your time, by the way. Again, if you are interested in this conversation, you want to keep learning about Jackie Robinson, 42 today, Jackie Robinson and his legacy, out now, I believe. Correct, Michael?
Out now, yeah.
Yes, out now. So go get it, Amazon or whatever bookstore, you know, if you can have a bookstore nowadays. But I wanted to ask you these last 2 questions. What moment specifically through Jackie Robinson's career, or maybe his life, something outside of baseball, that you would have wanted a front row seat to see for yourself?
All right, so this is way too intimate a moment. And while I wouldn't want to be there, it's my favorite moment from Robinson's life. On October 24th, 1972. This is 9 days, by the way, after he makes an appearance at the World Series. He throws out the ceremonial pitch, and then he goes to the microphone and says, "I'm happy to be here today. I'll be much happier when I look down third baseline and see a black face managing baseball."
Yes.
And as you know, at that point,
yes.
Yeah, I love that moment. I really love October 24th, 1972. He's taking a shower. early morning, and Rachel's in the kitchen, and Jack calls out her name. She called him Jack. He calls out her name, and she knows something's wrong. So she runs down the hallway, and there he is, dripping wet. And he grabs her and gives her a big hug, and he says that he loves her. And then he collapses and dies. And for me, that moment is so incredible because it's a testament to the love that they had for each other and the love that kept them strong from 1947, well, actually before 47, but especially in 1947 and beyond. It's the love that really ended up changing America. I love that moment in Robinson's life. I wouldn't want to be there for that, but I love that moment.
Yeah, that's insane to think about, honestly. I can't believe, I'm assuming Rachel told you that? I mean, that's a crazy story, too.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure where I learned that. I don't think Rachel told me that one.
Yeah, that's wow. That's
Yeah.
I can't even imagine, just, you know. I do remember the suddenness of his death. I remember that video is like his last like public appearance, and of course the last thing he does is advocate for a black manager. And since we're on the topic of black managers and all that, I wanted just to end this interview with giving a shout out to the guys that, you know, we don't talk about as much. You know, we again, everyone knows Jackie Robinson and his greatness, but it is Black History Month. The Negro Leagues have become, I don't know if it's more popular. I don't know what the right phrase is, but the MLB's like normalized or legitimized their stats, and they have a Negro Leagues page on their front website now, and everyone's trying to get the knowledge up about the Negro Leagues. So I just wanted to ask you about some other Negro Leaguers, you know, like Josh Gibson, you know, who was the black Babe Ruth, or I like to call Babe Ruth the white Josh Gibson, and all that stuff, and the Satchel Paige and his greatness and all that stuff. So I just, you know, I wanted to give you the platform to maybe shout out some other Negro Leaguers that you found interesting, or, you know, like reading about and all that good stuff.
Well, I just second your opinion on the Negro Leagues and the way that they were so ignored. Not only just ignored, but put on the back of the bus.
Yeah.
You know,
let's go.
They were put on the back of the bus, not only in professional baseball, but then early on at the Baseball Hall of Fame. And Robinson detested the segregation that happened in the Baseball Hall of Fame. So I can only imagine how happy he would be to hear some of the recent news. Not only Negro League baseball, some of the unsung heroes we can find in the NBA, we can find in the NFL. You know, I'm embarrassed to say that I just learned about Willie O'Ree, who was the first black player for the National Hockey League, who's going to be honored in Boston, I think, this coming week. But those types of unsung players, oh my gosh, the stories that they have are stories that we historians have to tell, that we journalists, that we podcasters have to tell, so that we can appreciate how far we've come and yet how far we have to go.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great time. I hope people go out and get your book. Go learn something about Jackie Robinson. You can go. There's a bunch of good contributors on the book as well. You mentioned them earlier, and I can't wait to go out, get it, and read it and hail it myself, Michael. Thank you for joining us today.
Jose, what a pleasure. Thanks so much for your great questions and the wonderful conversation.
No problem. Okay, where can people find you, by the way? You obviously plug in the book, but is there anything else you want to plug before we get out of here?
Now 42 today. Let's stick with that. That's good enough.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
You too, Jose. Thanks.